society views children and their capacities. As U.S.-based educators, we know that learning is constant, but what matters is the type of learning and the context in which that learning takes place. In the conventional learning context, the classroom, the relationships between teachers, students, content, and culture community are key to understanding the dynamics of knowledge production. In the context of American urban schools, which many immigrant students attend, notions of safety, achievement, and sometimes empowerment are central to the prospect of undoing centuries of denying access to education. In the Caribbean, in the time before independence for most of the countries, having an education was to have a privileged access to social mobility. Education was, and still is, among the institutions that best symbolize transcendence. Therefore, a school, and more particularly a classroom, is never regarded as a site for feeling good emotionally. Rather, it is a site of strict knowledge production in order to attain an economic goal. In the context of the West's conception of modern and progressive education, Jonathan Cohen reminds us of the history of the movement and situates the child at its center. He writes, "The notion that we can and need to understand the whole child, including social and emotional functioning, was proposed and implemented in classrooms during the early part of the century by John Dewey, Felix Adler, and Maria Montessori. These pioneers of progressive education were soon joined by a growing number of students, teachers, such as Anna Freud, who was first a teacher, Rudolf Steiner, and many others in Europe and the United States, all of whom sought to make educational curricula more relevant to the child's social and emotional experience. Progressive educators held that, optimally, we need to pay attention to all facets of the child. This includes an attempt to discover where each child's particular strengths and weaknesses lie, what the child's interests are, and which helpful or unhelpful coping strategies he or she has developed." These ideas or pedagogical philosophies tend to be fully embraced by most teachers and school districts in the United States. However, as we are interacting with a diverse population from various parts of the world, we need to be mindful of how we approach the notion of the whole child in relation to emotional functioning. What may be a form of social and psychological engagement with a child may be perceived as prying from a person with a different cultural or pedagogical background where the totality of the child is not part of the pedagogical equation. In some cultures, the child's role is to go to school and learn. They are not to be heard from unless spoken to by the teacher, or unless they are propelled to ask questions relating to the material being taught. Additionally, the notion of creating dialogues between teachers and students simply does not exist if the student comes from a dictatorial or patriarchal space. Some Westerners developed philosophies as a result of the 2 world wars and other traumatic events that forced educators to examine those lived experiences in the context of education. But other parts of the world have not had the dialogic spaces or the psychoanalytical incentive or capacity to explore the whole being of the child within the context of learning in a democratic classroom. I echo Stephen Wolk's position when he asserts that the idea behind the democratic classroom is to create an environment of trust that allows children and their teachers the freedom to explore, to ask questions, to inquire, to think. If we want children, and later adults, who can and will think for themselves, then we must have classrooms that allow them to do exactly that. While this is indeed true, the problem arises with teachers who are not democratic, or who simply believe that certain students are not worthy of being treated democratically. Additionally, sometimes a school might also have teachers whose cultures never experienced democracy, yet are expected or assumed to teach as if they already know what a democratic classroom looks like. Not only should school systems be mindful of their diverse and multilingual student body, but they should also be mindful of their diverse teachers' experiences and pedagogical philosophies. I was born